My brother stole the company I built with my own hands over 15 years, forged my signature on the corporate documents, and took everything. But he didn't know I had recorded every decision, every contract, and every email since the very first day. The day I discovered what my brother had done, I was sitting in a notary's office holding a contract that supposedly bore my signature. But I hadn't signed it. It was my name. It was my ID number. It was even a passable imitation of my handwriting. But it was not my signature. And I knew it because that date, that specific Tuesday, 3 years ago, I was at the hospital with my mother during a surgery that lasted 8 hours. I had the photos on my phone. I had the hospital records. I had the messages I had sent my friends from the waiting room while I waited for my mother to come out of the operating room. I was not at any notary's office that day, and yet there was my signature on a document transferring 51% of the company I had founded, built, and sustained for 15 years to my brother, Rodrigo. I went cold. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't do any of the things you imagine you would do in that moment. I thought only one thing, that he didn't know what I had saved. My name is Isabella. I'm 42 years old. I'm an industrial designer and entrepreneur, and at 27, I founded a custom furniture manufacturing company for corporate spaces. I call it a company as if that were an ordinary word, but it isn't. That company is 15 years of my life. It's the reason I didn't take a vacation for the first 5 years. It's the reason I ended 2 relationships that could have been good. It's the reason I taught myself bookkeeping, basic business law, logistics, supplier management, and public relations because in the beginning there was no one else to do it. The company is called Form and Structure. It started in a rented 40 square meter space with a bandsaw, a small milling machine, and me. Today it has an 800 square meter workshop, 14 full-time employees, and a client roster that includes some of the most important architecture firms in the country. It took 15 years to build that, and my brother thought he could take it from me with a pen and a forged signature. Rodrigo is 2 years older than me. He was always the favorite child, though in our family no one said it out loud, because my mother was one of those people who insisted she loved her children equally. But my mother's equal had very different forms depending on the child. Rodrigo received money when he asked for it. I received advice. Rodrigo received understanding when he failed. I received higher expectations. Rodrigo was the one who has bad luck in business. I was the one who always figures it out on her own. For a long time, that role suited me fine. I preferred being the one who figured it out alone. It was cleaner, more predictable, less dependent on the variable generosity of my family. The problem with that role, I discovered later, is that people who always figure out on their own don't generate pity. And people who don't generate pity don't receive protection. And when someone in your own family decides to hurt you, the absence of family protection can cost you everything. Rodrigo joined the company 7 years ago. It was my idea to be fair. At that point, the company was growing faster than I could manage alone. I needed someone I trusted in the sales division. Rodrigo had been without steady work for a year. My mother asked me to give him a chance, and I thought it was a good solution for everyone. I gave him the position of commercial director. Good salary, full benefits, a small team to manage. And more importantly, I gave him something I should never have given so easily: access. Access to clients, access to contracts, access to the contacts I had cultivated over years, access to financial information that, in the hands of someone with bad intentions, was a complete map of how the company worked. At first, everything was fine. Rodrigo was charismatic with clients, something I recognized as a real skill, even if it was different from mine. He closed some contracts I wouldn't have closed with my more direct style. He brought in some new clients. I thought I had made a good decision. What I didn't see, or what I didn't want to see, was what he was building in parallel. The signs came slowly, the way the signs of things you don't want to believe always come. First, it was a client who called me to thank me for the Tuesday meeting I hadn't attended and hadn't been told about. Rodrigo had represented the company without telling me. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I called it an internal communication lapse and said we would fix it. Then it was a supplier who asked me about a change in payment terms I had supposedly authorized. I hadn't authorized it. Rodrigo had negotiated directly, bypassing my finance department. I called him out on it. He said it had been a quick decision to avoid losing the supplier. I accepted it, though with less ease than the first time. Then there was the meeting with the outside attorney that Rodrigo had convened, without my knowledge, to review the company's corporate structure. I found out through an email the attorney sent me by mistake, thinking Rodrigo had already told me. That email was the moment something inside me shifted position. Like when you hear a click in a lock and you know something has closed or opened, even though you don't yet know what. I started paying closer attention, and I started saving everything. What I discovered over the following months was methodical and deliberate. It was not the impulsive act of someone desperate. It was a plan. Rodrigo had been quietly building a parallel relationship with 3 of our most important clients. Meetings outside the office. Proposals sent from a personal email address, not the company one. Conversations in which, as those same clients told me later, he implied the company was going through leadership changes and that he was the person who would provide continuity. At the same time, he had contacted 2 of our key suppliers to negotiate exclusive arrangements that, on paper, were in the name of form and structure, but included clauses giving him, personally, independent management rights. And he had visited a notary. That was the final and most serious step. He had presented corporate modification documents that altered the capital distribution of the company, shifting from structure where I held 100% of the shares to one where he held 51. The documents included what was supposed to be my signature authorizing the transfer. A signature, as I said, that I had never given. Because that day, I was in a hospital. When I sit and think about that period, about the months that followed the discovery, what surprises me most is not the betrayal itself. Betrayal hurts, but it has a logic you can process. What surprises me most is the coldness with which Rodrigo kept coming to work every day, sitting in the office next door, having coffee in the same kitchen, asking how this project or that client was going, as if nothing had happened, as if the papers he had signed at that notary's office didn't exist. That taught me something about the nature of betrayal that no book had ever taught me. The most dangerous traitors are not the ones who explode. They're the ones who smile. I smiled too during those weeks. I smiled and saved everything I found. I documented every irregularity. I requested copies of the notarial records. I hired a private handwriting expert to analyze the signature on the corporate documents. I asked 3 clients to provide written records of the communications they had had with Rodrigo acting as if he were the owner of the company. And then I called my attorney. Attorney Montserrat Vega had been practicing commercial and financial criminal law for 12 years. A colleague in the manufacturing industry had recommended her after going through a corporate dispute herself a few years earlier. She's small, quiet, and absolutely lethal, my colleague told me. Exactly what you need. She was right. Attorney Vega listened to my case for 2 hours with an expression that never changed. At the end, she reviewed her notes in silence and told me we had at least 3 simultaneous legal lines of action. The first was a criminal complaint for document forgery and fraud. The forged signature on the notarial documents was a criminal offense carrying prison time. The second was a civil action for nullity of the fraudulent corporate acts to legally reverse the share transfer Rodrigo had attempted through the forgery. The third was a lawsuit for financial damages arising from the unauthorized actions he had taken on behalf of the company, including the supplier negotiations and the promises made to clients. How much documentation do you have? She asked. I placed 3 index binders on her desk. She looked at me as if I had just handed her a gift. When did you start keeping all this? From the first day I opened the company, I told her. It's a habit. For the first time in that meeting, she smiled. What followed was a legal process that lasted 18 months, and which I'm going to describe as clearly as possible, because I want you to understand every part of it. The criminal complaint was filed first. The district attorney's office opened a formal investigation for forgery of signature on a notarial instrument. The handwriting expert I had privately hired presented her report. The signature on the corporate documents was incompatible with my writing patterns at multiple specific technical points. The prosecutor's office hired its own expert for a second opinion. The conclusion was the same. Rodrigo was summoned to testify. He arrived with his own attorney, a man who had clearly told him to deny everything. Rodrigo denied having had any involvement in the forgery. He said he was unaware of how the documents had been generated. He said he had acted in good faith based on papers that had been presented to him as legitimate. But there was a problem with that version. The notary before whom the documents had been signed testified that the process had been initiated directly by Rodrigo, that Rodrigo had presented the documents and been present throughout the entire process, and that the person who had signed as me, based on the notary's physical description, did not exactly match my appearance. That testimony was the first of several moments in which Rodrigo's version began to crack. The civil nullity action ran parallel to the criminal proceeding. The judge assigned to the case was a meticulous man who reviewed every document with an attention that made me think he genuinely loved his work. Attorney Vega presented the complete timeline. The hospital records from the day of my mother's surgery proving my presence there, the hospital logs with my name as the registered companion, the photographs from my phone with location metadata confirming I was at that hospital and not at the notary's office, and the messages sent from my phone throughout that day that built an unbroken timeline. Rodrigo could not be in two places at once. Neither could I. And while he was at that notary's office signing with my name, I was in a hospital hallway praying for my mother to come through a hip surgery. Rodrigo's attorney attempted to argue that the photo metadata could have been manipulated. Attorney Vega responded by presenting the hospital's server records, which were institutional, unalterable by any private individual, and which confirmed exactly what I was saying. That argument died there. The third front was the most personally painful, though also the most revealing. The three clients Rodrigo had contacted independently agreed to provide written statements. One of them, the director of an architecture firm I had worked with for 8 years, said something I still remember precisely. That Rodrigo had told him I was considering stepping back from business, and that he was the right person to provide continuity. That I knew nothing of this. That I had never considered stepping back. That I had spent 15 years building something I had no intention of walking away from. That testimony affected me more than I had expected, not because of the betrayal itself, but because of the image Rodrigo had constructed of me in front of people who knew me. He had turned me into someone who was leaving, someone dispensable, and he had done it without saying a single word to me. The two suppliers he had attempted to tie into parallel agreements also testified. The contracts he had negotiated without my authorization were presented to the judge as evidence of direct financial damage to the company. The judge read all of it. The final hearing in the civil proceeding took place on a Thursday in November. It was raining. I arrived with Attorney Vega, with my binders, and with a calm that surprised even me. It wasn't the calm of someone who feels nothing. It was the calm of someone who has done everything within their power and now can only wait for the system to work. Rodrigo arrived with his attorney and with my mother. That did affect me, my mother sitting on his side, with an expression that wasn't exactly support, but something more complicated, more ambiguous, that I have never fully been able to decode. It wasn't that she believed he was innocent. I think she knew exactly what had happened. It was something more like the pain of a mother who cannot choose between her children without breaking apart. I didn't look at her much that day. I couldn't afford that additional weight. The judge entered, sat down, and began reading his ruling. He declared null and void all corporate acts arising from the forged documents. The shareholder structure of form and structure returned to its original state, 100% in my name. He ordered financial compensation for the economic damages arising from the unauthorized negotiations, calculated at the equivalent of 2 years of potential lost contracts. And he forwarded the complete file to the district attorney's office as additional support for the ongoing criminal proceeding. The criminal proceeding concluded 4 months later. Rodrigo was found guilty of forgery of commercial documents and use of forged instruments. The sentence was 3 years of suspended imprisonment, meaning he would not enter prison as long as he complied with the conditions imposed. Community service, a significant financial fine, and an absolute prohibition on holding executive positions in any company for 5 years. His attorney appealed. The appeal was rejected. It was not the harshest sentence he could have received. I know that. There were moments during the process when I wanted more. I wanted consequences that were more visible, more immediate, more proportional to the damage he had tried to do to me. But I also learned something about justice during those 18 months. That justice doesn't always look the way you imagine, and that its value lies not in the severity of the punishment, but in the restoration of order. My company was mine again. The forged documents were invalid. The public record reflected the truth. That was what mattered. The consequences that followed were multiple. Professionally, the story got out. In a world of manufacturing and design, the circles are small and news travels. Several of the clients Rodrigo had contacted called me to apologize and to confirm they would continue working with form and structure. The architecture director who had testified on my behalf became one of my strongest professional allies. He referred 3 new clients to me in the following year. The 2 suppliers Rodrigo had tried to tie into parallel contracts rescinded any informal arrangements they had started with him and restored their normal relationships with the company. One of them offered me better terms than we had before, as a gesture of goodwill. Personally and within the family, things fractured in ways that still haven't finished taking their final shape. My mother and I spoke, with difficulty, several months after everything was over. It wasn't a reconciliation conversation. It was an honest conversation, perhaps the most honest we have ever had, in which she acknowledged that she had always assumed I could handle things on my own and that this had freed her from the responsibility of protecting me, and that this was not love, even though for years it had felt like it to her. That conversation was worth more than any court ruling. Rodrigo and I have not spoken since the final hearing. I have no clarity on what I feel toward him. It isn't hatred, though there was hatred. It isn't indifference, though sometimes it seems like it. It's something more like the resignation of recognizing that some people, even those who should be your most natural ally in the world, decide to be something else entirely, and that there is nothing you can do to change that decision. You can only protect yourself from its consequences. What I'm clear on is what I took away from all of this. I took away the confirmation that building something real with your own hands over 15 years leaves a record that cannot be erased with a forged signature. The company had history. It had clients who had known me from the beginning. It had suppliers who made the decisions for a decade and a half. It had employees who had watched that 40-square-meter workshop grow into what it is today. That record was stronger than any forged document. I also took away the habit of documentation, which I started as an organizational practice and which ended up being the tool that saved what I had built. Every contract signed, every important decision recorded in writing, every relevant communication saved. That isn't distrust. That is business maturity. And I took away form and structure, which today, 3 years after all of this, is larger and more solid than it was before. We have 19 employees. We just launched a second production line. And last year, we received an industry recognition from a design guild that meant more than I expected, perhaps because it came at a moment when I needed someone external to tell me that what I had built had real value. It does. It always did. And now the public record says so too. If you have a company, if you have a business, if you have something you built with your own effort, document everything. Not the day a problem arises. From day one. Because problems don't announce themselves, but records do speak. And if someone in your own family tries to take what you built, I want you to know that there are specialized attorneys, there are prosecutors, there are judges, and there are commercial and criminal laws designed exactly for that situation. You are not alone. You are not defenseless. And surrendering is not the only option. It never was. If this story hit close to home, comment, have you ever had to fight for something you built alone? Like if you believe honest work deserves legal protection. Subscribe for more stories of real justice. Share with someone who runs their own business and needs to know they can protect it. Practical tip. If you own a business, always keep a written record of every major decision. Save your signed contracts with dates, and consider protecting your corporate structure with preventive legal advice. It costs far less to protect yourself before a dispute than to litigate after one.